Yo, what up, what up? Um, I wanted to make this video real quick, and I just wanted to make this video real quick to speak about how politics, I don't normally like speaking about politics. Normally it's something I try to stay away from to the best of my abilities. But obviously, because we live in a world that's, in a society that's ran by politics, sometimes you just can't really avoid it, you know what I mean? Unless you're literally out in the forest in the middle of nowhere, or you live in a tribal community where you have your own structure. But if you don't, then obviously you have to you have to deal with it. You have to deal with it. You have to be in and around it, And I think, especially now with what happened with USA and Iran, I don't know exactly what happened, but obviously I know something happened. I don't know exactly what happened, but I know there's some kind of conflict. People, of course, your average, fear pondering of a potential world war, which I kind of understand because, there is a lot of tension. It feels like there's a lot of tension. It feels as though there's a lot of tension, and I don't want to say there's tension between nations. It just feels like there's a lot of tension in the common folk. And when there's a lot of tension in the common folk, it's a sign that that tension is also present in higher places, right? When the common folk are just very tense, there's just a lot of tension with people. When people are around other people, there seems that there's a lot of tension. It feels like there's a lot of tension. Then that just to me signals that there's also a lot of tension coming from above, because it just kind of like trickles its way down. It kind of trickles its way down to us, to the masses, to the 99%, if you want to call it that, to the majority, not the minority. But I was just thinking about how politics nowadays has really just become quite a clown show. It's really just such a disgrace. Politics nowadays is really just such a fucking disgrace. Like, I don't even want to cuss, but it's a fucking disgrace. Like, politics nowadays is just horrible. And the thing is, I was just thinking about how before, right? Back in the day when, the United States first came about, according to history, when the United States first came about, and I just think about it in terms of images, and I think about the images, of before compared to the images of now, and it's like, you can see the difference just in the image, like a picture can paint a million words, which is why we're so drawn to art, because art sometimes shows the bigger picture without needing to explain it through a book. And I think about Trump and Biden arguing on a stage, Trump, just yelling at him, insulting him, almost like a child. Biden doing the same thing. Biden not even knowing where he is. Not even knowing where he is, bro. And then I compare that image to the image of, say, George Washington. And just like, those old images where they're in like those beautiful buildings. Those beautiful old style buildings. And they're in the court. And they're all extremely well dressed. And it's not even the fact that they're well dressed. It's just like the aesthetic of it. Maybe I'm romanticizing it, but the aesthetic of it, or I compare that Trump and Biden image to like an image of Socrates. Socrates and Plato and all those guys in the past, who I'm not saying were perfect. I'm not saying they were perfect humans. But back in the day, they were like the pinnacle of humans, they were the pinnacle of that political sphere, if that makes sense. I'm not saying they were the pinnacle of what it is to be a human. I'm just saying they were the pinnacle of that political sphere. The politicians of before who were actual scholars. You know, they were actually scholars. And it's not just that they had a fancy degree. They were real scholars. They were philosophers. They were athletes. They were athletes, you know, like that might not seem like it matters, but to me it matters. It matters. A person's physical appearance does matter to me to an extent. You know, it signals to you this person cares about themselves. You know, they care about, like, appearances do matter when you're thinking about a professional environment. When you're thinking about a professional environment, especially something as delicate as politics, where one decision can change everything for better, for better or for worse, then yes, professionalism and appearance absolutely does play a part. I'm not saying it's everything. I'm just saying that back in the day, that image, you know, of those great empires, obviously they're gone now, but those images of those great empires, or even the US when it first started, before slavery, you know, before all that, when it was first, you know, like those 13 states or whatever they call it, and there was actually a lot of, it just felt like it was better. It was more natural. It was more pure. You know, there was more community. People talked to each other more. There was more open dialect. That's what it is. There was more open dialect. You know, when they were in those courtrooms, it wasn't to argue. There wasn't like you can't say what you want to say. Like, the whole point of those discussions were to get to a point where there's a consensus. You know, there's a consensus for the greater good. There was a greater aim for the greater good. They weren't just in that courtroom for like shits and giggles. You know what I mean? And that's what it feels like now. It's like these fucking clowns that we call politicians, that we call our world leaders, are just a bunch of fucking clowns, especially here in the US. Especially, it feels like here in the US and in Europe and in the Western world, it's just a bunch of fucking indoctrinated clowns, bro. It's just a bunch of clowns. Because the evidence, look, when it comes to the old empires, the evidence is there, you know? Like, the evidence is there that these were great empires. They were great societies. They were amazing societies, you know? Even you think about Tartaria, which is not, people will debate whether it was real or not. In my opinion, I think it was real. And I think that there are remnants of it, for example, in the cathedrals. And if you don't know the true meaning on the cathedrals or the true purpose of the cathedrals, then you are like, that's something you need to look into, because it's gonna blow your mind, and it's gonna show you how some dark force, whether you call it the devil, the Satan, whatever you want to call it, the demiurge, the archons, it just shows that some dark force took over this world. Right? There is like a dark force that took over this world and turned everything into dog shit. The cathedrals is just one example of it. They took these beautiful structures that were meant to be used for something that was going to benefit a whole community, and then they turned that into a fucking religion. They used the cathedrals and they turned those godly structures, and I'm calling them godly structures because that's what they are. Those structures are godly. They are divine. The architecture was made for divine purposes because they were made to heal. So whoever or whatever came up with that, they were connected to a higher power. They were connected to a higher power. They took from nature and they created something divine. Not everything that is created from nature has to be demonic, right? But what I'm saying is, it's just an example. It's an example of how, yeah, there's a dark force at play here that clearly is just hell-bent on making things as bad as possible for everyone. And the politicians are like their puppets. The politicians are just their puppets. You know what I mean? Politicians are just puppets for them, like on little strings, to make things bad. And part of it, I do believe, is spiritual. I do believe part of it is spiritual, right? It's more of a spiritual war. When you have world leaders who are actually pedophiles and satanic worshipers, you know that there's something spiritual at play here. And you know that this is not just a physical war, that it's actually a spiritual war. Because for someone to actually turn to that and become that kind of person who does those kinds of things, especially in positions of power, this person is dealing with their internal world is quite literally hellish. They are in hell internally. They are a demon. Within them is a demon controlling their physical body, and that's just the way I see it. But yeah, politics, going back and finishing on what I was saying, yeah, politics has become a shit show. And I just wanted to make a video just to speak on that. It's just, yeah. And it's part of the reason I don't speak about it, but I just wanted to say that it doesn't matter, bro. It doesn't matter, Republican, Democrat. It's all dog shit. It's all dog shit. And the proof is in society as a whole, bro. And it's just, yeah. Anyways, I want to finish the video on that. I don't want to make it too long, and I don't want to overextend. So yeah, bye.